What's up? I'm DIALTONE, and I did it. I finally graduated with my music production degree. It's official. It's been a long time coming, but I finally did it. And we're going to talk about it today. So was it worth it? I don't know yet. It's too soon to tell. But we're going to talk about it. So let's go through the pros and cons of going through music production school. So let me give you a little bit of a backstory before I jump into the pros and cons. I went to a school in Oregon called Portland State University, and before I actually went there, I was a transfer student, so I was attending another school called Clackamas Community College. Like I said, I was a transfer student, and I actually got pretty lucky with this one because the program that I actually went to at Portland State to get my music production degree, it didn't exist, and I actually was the first class to actually go through it. It was called the SAMP program. So SAMP stands for Sonic Arts and Music Production. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with my experience getting my music production degree, even though the program I went through was brand new. Not only did we learn how to be a good traditional producer, we actually learned how to pretty much be a musician and really get in the mind of the person that you are recording or the song that you're making. I feel like this program was extremely thorough. We learned things from basic mic placement to how to use a DAW, and then we also got a really high level understanding of music theory, and then we also learned the meticulous things like how sound moves and how it works in our 3D space and why it's important to know all the meticulous details of sound. They also take you through the nitty-gritty details of synthesis and why you should understand and know how a synthesizer works, going from granular synthesizers to wavetable synthesizers and a lot more. It was a very, very thorough program. So now that I've kind of given you a little bit of a backstory, let's get into the pros first. Quick disclaimer before we get into it, I will only be talking about this program in particular. I don't know how other programs go, so this is just basically my experience at Portland State University going through the SAMP program. So let's get into it. So for the first pro, in this program, there was a large focus on creativity. It felt conventional, yet a little bit unconventional, which I thought was kind of refreshing and nice. They wanted their students at this college to push the boundaries of sound and music in general. They wanted something more than just making tracks that will be played out on the radio. I took multiple classes where they required us to make soundscapes, and yeah, pretty sure that's what they're called. I would Google that if I were you. But basically, instead of making a conventional track where it's like, intro, verse, chorus, they wanted you to just make sounds and basically have the intent of evoking some sort of emotion. They would basically just give you a time limit on how long they want the track to be, and then just be like, all right, evoke some type of emotion and write about it. So it was kind of cool about that. So yeah. So for this next pro, it kind of ties into the first, but there was a large focus on textures and sonic arts and however you want to interpret that. But I mean, textures of sound are basically like everything that makes up a sound that doesn't generate the tone that the sound is in the key of. I'm brutalizing that description, but I mean, there was this one class that I took called Laptop Ensemble, was where we used like these small MIDI controllers that only worked with a very specific granular synthesizer, where we actually imported files that we had created, sound files, I should probably say that. But basically what this granular synthesizer would do was like take grains of that particular sound and like make them long sustaining notes, or it makes them very randomized attack heavy tones, and it was really interesting. I mean, I've never ever looked at music or sound in that way before, so it really opened up my mind. And honestly, now since I make a lot of dubstep and EDM, having a large focus on textures, I mean, I have a pretty solid understanding of how to make ambient noises and how to make sounds that take up a very specific frequency range that maybe my track is lacking. So yeah, I mean, I feel like it was a pretty good con. So for this next pro, I think this one might be the most important on this entire list that I've made, and that is the focus on music business. The classes that I took that pertain to music business were honestly probably one of like the hardest classes I took throughout my entire college career. There was a huge focus on music business, and honestly, they were really fun, but oh my gosh, they were really hard. But I feel like that's a really good thing, and I think that I have a really solid understanding now of how the music business actually works. And some of the textbooks that we were required to acquire for the classes, I still constantly go back and reference them. So yeah, music business, very important. Okay, moving along to pro number 4. And this pro is good for people that are interested in being a film scorer or writing scores for commercials or video games. We got the opportunity to practice film writing and commercial writing on clips that our teacher provided us with. It's basically just like a bunch of movies without backing tracks, and the teacher kind of just went into explicit detail on why our pieces worked or didn't work. And he basically would give us feedback on our film scores or video game scores or commercial scores, give us solid tips and give us solid advice on what we should do next time or what we did great or that sort of thing. The classes that we were required to take that did pertain to writing film scores honestly were probably one of my favorite classes. Okay, so for this next pro, I feel like it's kind of an obvious one. We got access to a professional studio, and that kind of gave us the opportunity to get our hands dirty in a real world scenario. And even though this was the program's very first year doing it, their studio setup was actually pretty good. I was pretty impressed with it. A lot of times in the classes, they provided us with professional musicians to come in and kind of give us a simulated version of what it would be like in the real world situation where you would be recording an artist. And also a lot of the production classes that we took were in the same building that all the other music students go to. So it was nice to have like novices and then professionals at the same time. It's just there was an endless opportunity of practice in a professional studio. Okay, this pro isn't gonna really sound like a pro, but it 100% is. This program, they put you through music theory boot camp, music theory and piano boot camp. They want you to have a pretty good understanding of music theory and have a basic understanding of how to play the piano. Previously, I didn't really have a great music theory or piano understanding, so this experience was pretty grueling for me, but I'm happy that I got through it because now I got a pretty good, solid education on music theory and piano, and I feel like I will never forget it because they drill it in your head so hard. And also, I mean, I use music theory every day while I'm, producing music and stuff. So this is 100% a pro. Okay, so this pro is really, really nice. When you're a student, you get very, very good student discounts on applications and music software and plugins and all that stuff. I actually bought the full version of Ableton, which is Ableton Live Suite, and it was like, I think it's like $900 if you're not a student. But with the student discount, it basically gets cut in half. So instead of paying $900, I paid like $450 or $425 or something like that. Pretty much every type of music software, there's most likely going to be a student version of it. So, and usually the student versions don't vary from like the regular version that you would buy if you didn't have, or if you weren't a student and couldn't get a student discount. So yeah, it is really nice. It's super nice to get those discounts. This next pro pertains to synthesis. Before going to Portland State, I had a pretty good understanding of like how synthesis worked, but I didn't really understand what I was doing. It was more of me just like twisting knobs and being like, oh, that sounds good, or like, oh, that sounds bad. So they teach you a lot about the history of synthesis and like when specific type of synthesis had occurred, like granular synthesis or wavetable synthesis, or subtractive and additive synthesis. They drill it into your head and they basically provide you a whole nother level of understanding how synthesis works. There was a program that we used in a class called, oh gosh, I think it was called like Laptop Ensemble, or maybe it was called Synthesis for Musicians or something like that. But we used this program called Max for Live, and I'm pretty positive, don't quote me, but I'm pretty positive that's all of Ableton's stock plugins that they have and effects, I'm pretty sure are based on some of the parameters of Max for Live. And Max for Live is very intimidating. I had a really hard time getting used to the controls on it because it's literally a blank slate. If you wanted to make a 440 hertz tone, you have to basically give Max a source of like a sine wave, and then after that you have to give it an amplitude, and then you would have to put in the frequency that you want it to produce, and then you have to make a speaker icon that goes out your speakers. And it's very intricate, and it was hard. It was really tough and kind of boring at the same time. But we went through like how a subtractive synthesizer works and how a frequency modulation synthesizer works through Max, and basically we were able to simulate something like FM8 or something like Razor from Native Instruments. We were basically able to mimic that through using Max for Live. So it was pretty interesting, but it was really tough learning Max. So for the last pro that I'm going to talk about, if none of the pros that I've listed before don't really sound like pros to you, this one is definitely going to sound like a pro to you. Like if you already are a pretty good music producer and you don't really need to know all the stuff that I'd stated previously because you already have a pretty good understanding. You're at a music school and you're going through a music production program with other people. So you have an endless opportunity of collaboration because you're surrounded by other music producers and other artists. I feel like if not this is the best pro, it's one of the best pros, because I personally made a lot of producer friends where I grew up, there wasn't a lot of producers. I think I was like one of very few music producers that I was actually able to collaborate with. And I know you could collaborate with people reaching out to them like through social media or online, but at this school, Portland State, you can actually be with them, you know, face to face, and you can rent out studio time and work together on a specific project. So I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, with with music business in general, like networking is very, very important. And yeah, so I feel like that's a really, really important one. Okay, let's move on to the cons now. So for this first con, it may or may not be a con depending on what DAW you actually use, but I know that like the industry standard all across America and pretty much all over the world is that in every studio, the audio engineers use Pro Tools. And I mean, that's just kind of the industry standard. At Portland State, we actually didn't use Pro Tools. And the community college that I was going to before I went to Portland State, they required us to use Pro Tools. And I also got a really good student discount on it. So I already had a pretty decent understanding of how to use Pro Tools. But then when I transferred over to Portland State, they had us use a program called Studio One, which is basically the same thing as Pro Tools. It just looks a little newer, to be honest. But I don't know if like the industry is like accepting Studio One as like the new standard or anything like that. But like from my understanding, Pro Tools is still number one. So you're required to use Studio One throughout the entire program. But I actually was able to kind of lie and say that I was using Studio One when I really actually wasn't. I mean, every DAW kind of does the same thing. So a lot of times I used Ableton just to complete all my projects and all my assignments and whatnot. So it didn't really matter. But yeah, so for this next con, it kind of depends on how much experience you have. But before I went to Portland State, I already had a pretty good understanding of music production due to the fact that I had been producing since I was about 14. So I already had like 4 years of experience under my belt inside of a DAW. The very beginning classes of the program are very, very basic, and they're basic. They teach you the basics of a DAW. And if you already have a lot of experience inside of a DAW and like actually producing music, it's going to be boring because it's very easy, but it's very boring. I mean, you might learn some techniques that you hadn't heard about. But that's pretty much it though. It's just it, but if you're a brand new at producing, then this is perfect for you. Okay, for this next con, and this one is by far the worst con out of the entire list, and that is performance attendance. So performance attendance was a class, not really, where they require everyone in the music program to attend a performance. Sounds simple, right? They're an hour long and they happen once a week. But basically everybody gathers into a concert hall and you just sit down and you watch performance and you take notes on it. The worst part about it is that most of the time, every single performance, it was opera music. But if you like opera music, then this is great for you. I'm not into opera music. I mean, sometimes they had some cool performances where it was like, you know, jazz band or something like that, because it was kind of interesting and kind of cool to watch, like the drummers. I really like drums, so it was interesting to watch the drummers play, and it was interesting to hear the pianist play, but there wasn't enough variety, to be honest with you. It was like 75% of the time it was opera music, and it got old. It got very, very old. But you're required to take it if you want to get your bachelor's in music production. Okay, so for this next con, it's kind of an obvious one, and it kind of pertains to every student if you are attending college. But textbooks are expensive, and the program that I went through for music production didn't shy away from that idea. They require just as much textbooks as any other degree. And I mean, although the textbooks were pretty interesting and I still use them nowadays because I didn't really sell them, I was like, I'm just gonna hold on to them because I'm sure that I'll use them for, you know, some type of question that pops up in my head later on in my music career. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Textbooks are expensive. So for this last con, I feel like this con kind of pertains to myself personally and all the other students that I went to school with. This program is still extremely new. It's not very indoctrinated program yet like Berklee's music production program is. So it kind of felt like sometimes the teachers were kind of learning with you. So I didn't really feel 100% confident in everything that they were teaching. But I mean, they still gave us a very solid education of music production. So that's pretty much it, honestly. That's all the cons. So I mean, we gotta ask the question now, like, was it worth it? I mean, I would say yes. Yes, it was worth it. But is it worth it for everybody? I would 100% just say it depends. It depends where you're at in your music career. If you're brand new to music production and you're like, oh, like I'm passionate about this and like I really want to do this for the rest of my life, then 100% I would go to music production school. If you're not really necessarily sure if it is your passion, then I would say, like, you know, think on it for a little bit longer and see if that's actually something that you would want to do. Also, it depends, like if you were, you know, producing at like 11 years old and you have some really good mentors and you're surrounded by some really good music producers, and I would say no. I would just say keep learning with them and just keep going with your already successful music career that you're going on. But yeah, I think it depends. I had fun. I think that the connections that I made are amazing. I still talk to a lot of students that were in the program today because, I mean, it's college. You make friends, you know? So yeah. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up the video. I hope you liked it. I hope I gave you a pretty general understanding of what to expect at this particular program. And if you have any questions and you're thinking about going to Portland State to get your music production degree, feel free to hit me up. I'll definitely answer your questions. But yeah, thank you for watching, and stay tuned. I know this is a brand new channel and I'm still kind of working out the kinks, and I'm still trying to get used to this whole YouTube thing in general. So thank you for the patience, and yeah, have a good day.